there is a little bit of truth, right, to the 30-gram thing. Like, it did originally come from like a study where it was breaking down like over how many hours or whatever it was, your rate of protein absorption or something to that effect. How often do you think you need the protein? Like, so you can store carbohydrates and we obviously store fat. It's my understanding you don't really store protein very well. I guess you probably store some, but when does your protein kind of like run out, I guess?
And to add on to that, there is a question that's continuously asked because we say we do some fasting. I hear this question on TikTok all the time. People are like, I thought you can only store 30 grams of protein. Oh. And if you eat more than 30 grams of protein in a sitting, your body's just going to not use it. There's that. That's a real thought process. So can you kind of just like go in on that so we can see what's going on?
Yeah. So I feel like that myth, I have to debunk it like every few years. It just will not die. Yeah. So let's define our terms first. So in terms of need, protein need is mostly defined by what's going to prevent you from being deficient, right? So guys like us, we're not really concerned about need. What we're really asking when people ask this question, how much protein do I need? They're really asking is how much protein do I need to kind of like max out, the anabolic response? Like if I'm trying to build muscle like that, right? That's usually the question they mean. And then in terms of like when they say how much protein can I absorb, again, usually what they're wanting to ask is how much protein contributes to muscle building. So this is a super complicated question there's the short answer that's pretty simple. The short answer that's pretty simple is if you have 20 to 50 grams of relatively high quality protein at a meal, that's probably good enough. And when we say high quality, like towards the 20 gram range, like whey protein, you don't really need a ton of whey protein because it's so high in leucine and so quickly absorbed. Getting to things like intact protein sources, if we get on the really far end of that spectrum of, like intact plant proteins, you need quite a bit of them because a lot of the protein is bound up in insoluble fiber that you can't digest. So then it becomes a real concern. But if we're talking about high quality kind of animal-based protein sources, and even some of the isolated plant proteins like soy and pea and some of these other ones, they're pretty high digestibility as well. So you're going to absorb almost all of it. I mean, I think like even pea protein is like 89% bioavailable. So you're absorbing almost all of it, because if you didn't, then every time you had more than 30 grams of protein, you would have massive diarrhea, which Mark might tell you that,
hey now,
I that must be me because I think I broke the bathrooms at the first super training.
Oh yeah.
The first time I visited, but that's actually squats. So we have the wrong comparator. Whenever I squat, I have to shit a lot.
Scares the shit out of you, even though you're good at it.
I think it's just nerves.
Yeah,
I think it's nerves. At Nationals in 2015, I always tell people I set my PR, which is my poop record, which was 11 times.
Oh, Jesus.
At Nationals. When I go to a powerlifting meet, my first question is not like what my attempts are going to be. It's all right, how close is the bathroom to the warm-up room, right? So anyways,
that's fucking great.
So yes, you can absolutely absorb more than 30 grams per meal. You can absorb, for the most part, however much you take in for most sources, dependent on their bioavailability, right? Like if you take in 50 grams of pea protein and it's 90% bioavailable, that means you're going to absorb 45 grams.
There is a little bit of truth to right, to the 30-gram thing. Like it did originally come from like a study where it was breaking down like over how many hours or whatever it was, your rate of protein absorption or something to that effect.
Are you still trying to diet on chicken, broccoli, rice, dry turkey? It's no fun. And a lot of people avoid steak, but one of our sponsors, Piedmontese Beef, has amazing cuts of steak, some that have really low fat, like their flat iron steak that has 4 grams of fat and 80 grams of protein per steak. And then their ribeyes, which are just amazing, juicy, and fatty. So there's no reason to diet with chicken anymore. Andrew, can you please tell the people how to get Piedmontese?
It's over at Piedmontese.com. That's Piedmontese.com. At checkout, enter promo code PowerProject for 25% off your entire order. Head over there right now.
Does that Is that where this came from?
I'm not real sure where it came from. I think that, so this is one of those things where the answer and what the recommendation is probably fine, but the messaging is wrong, right? So the message that 30 grams of protein in a meal is what you should shoot for is probably relatively good, like in terms of maximizing muscle protein synthesis. There's another aspect to this that's I'm going to go into in a second that makes the situation more complicated, but that's probably a good recommendation. But it's not because you can't absorb anything past that. You can absorb all of it. It's just that as you increase your protein intake, you're going to increase your protein oxidation. So more of those amino acids are actually going to get converted into, they're going to get deaminated, which means they remove the nitrogen component of it. And they'll either be used for, anything in metabolism, but a lot of them are going to be used for gluconeogenesis. Some of them will go as for anaplerotic substrates for the TCA cycle, a lot of different things. But the body's not going to waste them. It's going to find, like we didn't survive a million years by the body saying, 31 grams of protein, we're just going to get rid of that next gram, or 50 grams of protein. Nope, we can't take that. We're just going to get rid of it, right? But in terms of maximizing muscle protein synthesis, 30 grams for most protein sources, for most people will probably do it. Now, if you're a 250 pound lean body mass IFBB pro, and you're taking in, a subpar protein source, yeah, maybe you need like 70, 80, 90 grams of that protein source. But for most people, remember that Gaussian distribution, that's 60 to 70%. For most people, that 30 gram recommendation is probably going to be just fine, right? Now, there's the other aspect to this, which we've just been talking about protein synthesis, but your accrual of lean tissue is a balance between the rate of protein synthesis minus the rate of protein degradation. So there is evidence that the cap on reducing protein degradation might be at a higher protein threshold, but it's very difficult literature to interpret because protein degradation is extremely difficult to measure. And I think I'll lose the audience if I go into the isotopic labeling and how they actually try to measure it. But suffice to say that when you eat a meal of like 30 grams of protein, probably less than 10% of that is actually going to contribute towards actual tissue. So you'll hear people, like you guys have probably heard some people say, well, you only need 10 or 50 grams of protein a day. You only need 50 grams. So all these people eating, 200 are wasting their time because, if you're talking about accruing 25 pounds of lean tissue over a year, which I think everybody would agree, that's a ton of lean tissue. It's like, it ends up being like 10 grams of protein a day that you're depositing when you consider that most lean tissue is also associated with, 70% water. So then you would say, well, why not just eat 60 grams of protein a day, right? Like, shouldn't that do it? Well, you're assuming that every single gram past that 50 gram mark will contribute to that. And that's not how it works. In order to maximize the rate of tissue deposition, it requires a disproportionately high amount of protein. So it's like you're getting diminishing returns, but you're still getting a return. It just becomes less and less as your protein goes up. So there was actually a recent meta-analysis, and they did what's called a regression analysis, which basically is trying to figure out per gram of protein, how much lean tissue does that correspond to? And they basically proposed that based on all these different models that they used, that we really haven't found the cap on lean tissue deposition with high protein diets. Now, that being said, I want to quantify this before everybody goes out and starts eating 500 grams of protein a day. Again, I'm just throwing out a hypothetical, but we might be talking about the difference between like eating 250 grams of protein a day and 500 grams of protein a day might be like 1 gram of protein deposited in lean tissue. So was it really worth that extra 500 grams you had, or that extra 250 grams you had a day, especially if, like it makes you feel like crap, your training suffers because you don't feel good. Like there's a lot of stuff to consider with this. So long story that was the long answer, but the short answer is 30 grams, over 4 or 5 meals is probably, for most people, a relatively reasonable amount to shoot for.